Hey there, it's Ingrid Blackburn, and today we're going to create some watercolor panels using Brusho, as well as the doodled flowers set. We're going to use that kind of fern leaf that you see down there, plus a couple sentiments. I'm going to start off with some Brusho. I have a couple browns, dark and light, and then I have favorite leaf green, and then I'm using yellow as well. So with this stamp set, we're just going to primarily use one image. I have a rather large watercolor panel. This is 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. Use a little bit of a de-static tool on there, and then we're going to stamp in Versamark. And I'm going to speed this up and kind of skip around because you don't need to see me stamp the entire panel, but you can kind of get the gist here. Just rotating my image around and just inking it up in Versamark ink, which is a watermark ink. We're going to then put it in some white embossing powder. I'm using White by Brusho, and we're going to get that heat set. And once that's all heat set, we're going to continue to stamp. Now the reason that I'm not stamping the entire panel and then adding my powder is because it's kind of hard to see on the white. So sometimes it helps to just stamp a couple images. Plus you don't want them to dry too much. Watercolor paper will absorb wetness. So it's better to do just 3 or 4 images and then get your powder on. And you can either heat set it or continue at that time. So here's our complete panel. You can see we have lots of images. You see them shiny there. And I like to do this before. There is an argument to be made about doing this afterward, but the reason that I like doing it before is some of those raised edges will trap some of this watercolor goodness, and that gives you some real different variation in your project. As we heat set our project throughout, it will kind of reheat the images and they kind of absorb a little bit of the color too. So if you really want it to be bright, bright, bright white, then do it afterward, but you're not going to get the same result. So that's kind of the difference. So I'm laying down a little bit of the Brusho there, and I decided to use a little bit of Oast Blue, and that was a mistake, so don't do that. But I'm going to show you my mistake. I figure better you can learn from it and see how I problem solve in action. So I've got a little bit of yellow and a little bit of leaf green down, and you can see the Oast Blue has a little bit of purple in it, and I wasn't thinking about that because that's the unique properties of Brusho. Brusho is really highly concentrated pigment, and what they do is they add different colors and together to form that one color when you're fully watercoloring with it. But when you just spritz it like this, you get that beautiful kind of variation. That's where we had the purple mixed in with the blue and the other shades to create that blue. Now you can see I was kind of dabbing away some of that ugliness. When that purple and yellow mixed, those are complementary colors and they don't like each other. So they turn ugly mud. So you can see parts of this is beautiful and parts of this is kind of So I'm just going to problem solve. I'm adding a little bit of brown here. And you can see it's still kind of not really what I wanted, so I'm removing a little bit while it's wet, and that's what you can do. Watercolor is very forgiving. Don't feel like, oh, that doesn't look good, let me trash this and start over. No, no, no. Try and pull some away, with a paper towel, and then add more like you just saw me do there. So we're just kind of brightening up that area again. And that's really what you're going to do. You're just going to kind of work it until you have it look how you want. Now after it dries, watercolor is so pretty when it's nice and wet, and then when it dries it becomes a little flat, and that's what you're seeing here. So I'm just kind of dabbing away any excess moisture before moving on. I'm just kind of inspecting my panel. I'm just kind of assessing, okay, where do I want it? And I've kind of pointed out I need a little bit in there, so I'm adding a little yellow, adding a little bit of leaf green, and just kind of really trying to punch it up a little, but you want to be careful about doing too much of that at once. It's better to go a little at a time and build up. That's kind of where the magic in watercolor is. So here's some of that dark brown, and I'm sorry, I think I added light brown earlier. We're adding just a little teeny bit of dark brown and spritz that. And what's really interesting with this versus creating mud with yellow and purple is the dark brown's really pretty. It has those orange flecks in there. And it really adds a little something when you combine it with the green and the yellow. And I was really kind of going for a leafy fall feel, and that's what I feel like I achieved by adding some of that brown to it, because let's be honest, leaves do turn brown. So we're going to add a little teeny bit more in the upper right corner. I always like to remember the rule of thirds, and the rule of thirds is really placing things not always so equal, but I also in design always like to add things in odd numbers, and 3s work really well for me. 3s and 5s. So I just added kind of a third spot of brown, and it really kind of, the project needed it at this point. Now, if I were leaving it whole, it would have been perfect. But because it was so big, I ended up cutting it. So here you see me just adjusting, adding a little bit of Brusho color, and that I really wasn't able to pull very much away because I had dried so much using my my Ranger heat tool. So I'm adding a little Brusho to my craft mat, and I'm going to activate it there, and you can use it from there. And don't forget, you can use Brusho as watercolor. So I just kind of created my own watercolor. It's not going to have the same result as you see with all those flecks because you're blending it all together, but that gives you a little more to work with. It turned out great, didn't it? I love this panel. So now we're going to cut that in half. Oh, actually, before we do that, we're going to lightly spritz, and I cannot stress lightly enough, a clean paper towel, and we're just, or cloth, and we're just going to wipe away some of that Brusho that accumulated on your images. And you can see it's a lot accumulated. And then, you can also zap it with a heat tool if you want, just to kind of brighten it up again. I don't think I did that here, but I really did brush a lot away. I feel that you need to do that a little bit more when you're using anything that's a form of paint versus dye ink. Dye ink's much easier to pull that away. Paint, you need to kind of scrub it a little bit, not too hard. So here you can see I have a brown piece of scrap paper, and I'm just stamping some of these sentiments from the same stamp set. Thanks. Kylie does a great job of adding a lot of wonderful sentiments along with images, so it's really great. One stamp set gives you everything that you need. That's always wonderful. I love that. And it's always nice. This is a fun little script. It goes really well with the doodle flowers. So we just got that into white embossing powder, got that heat set, and that's kind of where we're gonna go with these. I cut them down completely even. I had a 4.5 by 6 inch piece of watercolor paper. Forgive me, I do not know the metric conversion on that. And just added a little bit of the Tombow Mono Multi Liquid Glue to the back there. I love using that when I'm working with watercolor because I can very easily move that around. It's a really strong adhesive. It's very forgiving to use. So I always use a bone folder on the back and then pop an acrylic block on top just to kind of hold that down and let it flatten out a little bit. We're going to get those attached. I have them popped up using some foam adhesive squares, and then we're going to add our sentiments by gluing them down. I'm just going to snip the edge really quickly on an angle and then cut the other side, and that's really it. I like to use long straight edge scissors, that way I get a nice straight cut. If you use the little small ones, sometimes it turns out a little wonky. So a little bit of sequins and we're all set. 2 very quick cards, but really cool artwork pieces. I love doing watercolor with Brusho. So Kylie has Brusho as well as the dotted flower stamp in the shop, so be sure to check that out. And we'd love for you to subscribe. We post a new video every week. We've been doing this for a little over a year. So there's lots of great tutorials on our channel. Love to have you subscribe as well. And I'm going to add at the end of this video, after these close-ups right here, I'm going to add some extra videos that you can click on, some other interesting watercolor projects. And of course, there's the button to subscribe. So thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.